Hi, welcome to Oma's Kitchen.
Oregano.
Here in Oma's Kitchen, I'm going to make some short videos about some of the equipment that I use and about some kitchen tips. So I will be creating a whole new playlist that explains some of the stuff you see me using when I cook. I wanted to go over some of the tools that I use to mix food and talk about whether or not you actually need them. The simplest thing I wanted to point out is a whisk, and I put this out here so that I can compare that to some of the automated equipment that I have, because when I was first learning to cook, I didn't have a lot of equipment in my kitchen, and you learn to do some things by hand. You learn to mix by hand, to whisk by hand. For many years, I just used a fork to create pastry dough, because you use the fork to blend the shortening into the flour. And it actually makes a nice pastry dough. It wasn't until in the last few years I've had my kitchen set up completely, and I've been able to fill out my equipment with some of the stuff that I never used for the first 20 years I was cooking. So a fork and a whisk will get you pretty far. When it comes to mixing food, a little bit of elbow grease and some work, and of course a spatula, a really good sturdy spatula. Do the same thing that a stand mixer does most of the time. I still use my hand mixer. This was the first mixer I ever bought. I've had this one for almost a quarter of a century now, and it still works just fine. I used this for mashed potatoes. Once I mashed them up with a hand masher, I've used this to whip them and try to get most of the lumps out. It works fairly well for that, and I've used it for things like ice cream, homemade ice cream. You can't do that in the stand mixer because it's the bowl of ice cream sat down into another bowl of ice and salt. And if you haven't seen my butter pecan video, homemade butter pecan ice cream, the hand mixer, even though I have all of this equipment, it still has its uses, and I still use it occasionally. These days, I don't use the blender very often. The blender is really just for frozen mixed drinks and milkshakes. Those are the only two reasons I would use that, and half the time when I need that, I just use the little, this is a little Ninja blender. It works the same way as the big blender does, except this one makes individual cups. And I have several of these cups, so I can make individual milkshakes with this. Sometimes that really helps if you're trying to do the same amount for everyone. This one is a little bit stronger than the large blender as well. So the blender still has its place for, say I'm making mixed drinks for a party. The blender still has its place for that. The two handiest pieces of equipment that I've bought in the last few years, I've had my food processor. I think this one is 20 years old, 15 years old maybe. This one I use a lot for salsas, hummus. I made sauerbraten recently, and the recipe that I have, you add ground up ginger snaps to the sauerbraten gravy to thicken it up, and it gives it this wonderful flavor. I really needed my food processor for that, because you want them ground up into crumbs before you put them into the mixture. So my food processor actually, it's one of the major pieces of equipment that I use in the kitchen. The most recent purchase and most expensive purchase in this whole group is my stand mixer. I use this stand mixer a lot now that I have it. It's excellent for whipped cream or mascarpone whipped cream. I think you would have a hard time, even with the hand mixer. It takes you a lot longer to get the stiff peaks you're looking for in a whipped cream, unless you have a stand mixer. This was an expensive piece of equipment, and I actually, after I bought it, I had it for a year, and then it broke down on me, and I had to go get it fixed, which cost me a little bit of money. I want to say it was about $150 to get it fixed, but these are $500 new, so I felt like it was worth it. It was kind of a bummer though, because, I had to pay for it myself. It wasn't under warranty. I'd had it in a year and a half or whatever, but You know, my mother-in-law had a KitchenAid stand mixer for, I don't know, 40, 50 years and never had a problem with it. And then this one broke down after a year, so I was a little bit bummed out about that. It is worth it to have it, but I have to say I've had to get used to using it. There are times that it will overmix some of the things that I make, like my great-grandmother's cinnamon cake. There's a recipe for that on my channel as well. That is a vanilla cream cake with a cinnamon topping. I honestly think the cake batter comes out better when mixed by hand. It seems to want to split when it's overmixed. It's like a coffee cake. So it's a very thin, flat cake with the cinnamon topping on top. And I honestly think that dough comes out better mixed by hand. So there are times when I'm cooking on my channel that you'll see me using different equipment. And I just wanted to go over some of this equipment so that you could kind of get a feel for when it's appropriate to use any of it. And I also wanted people to understand you don't absolutely have to have a stand mixer. This is definitely a more professional piece of equipment than anything I had when we were first married or in the first couple of decades we were married. You can accomplish most of the same things without this. This just really helps in taking some of the elbow grease out of hand mixing or hand mixer. The food processor, I believe, is more important than anything here. There's a recipe I'm getting ready to do that is a orange and date muffin recipe, and you actually put a whole orange into the food processor and blend it all together. I don't think you can accomplish that recipe without a food processor. So if you're just starting out in your kitchen, I wanted you to know which pieces of equipment are probably more important. I mean, you're going to want some spatulas and some whisks to be able to mix some things by hand. And then if you're going to buy a piece of equipment, I recommend the food processor before you purchase anything else. Welcome to the new playlist of Oma's Kitchen Tips. And we will continue. We will go over some other equipment and some of the ways of handling food and handling the stuff in my kitchen. Thank you for joining me in Oma's Kitchen. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll upload more tasty videos soon, and a special shout out to Moon Pie and Lil Bit. Till next time.